Hello and welcome to the Slate Political Gabfest. August 28th, 2025, the Dial M for Mortgage Fraud edition. I'm David Plotz of CityCast from Washington, D.C., from New Haven, Connecticut, where she remains at Yale University Law School and the New York Times Magazine. My dear friend Emily the Bazelon. Hello.
Hello.
And from New York City, where he remains the co-anchor of the CBS Evening News and the anchor of CBS Evening News Plus, John Dickerson.
Hi, guys.
Hello. This week on the Gabfest, President Trump moves to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook in a bold and brazen effort to smash the independence of the Federal Reserve. Then Trump is trying to convert the National Guard into an at-hand local police force. Will Americans tolerate an army on the streets in American cities? Then the Trump administration is systematically, and to my mind, just inexplicably destroying the renewable energy industry. Why are they doing that? What possible good could that be? Plus, we will have cocktail chatter.
Let's play Burlington's Guess That Price. Back to school means back to saving. We're bringing you kids' jeans starting at, hold on a minute, just $11.99. Burlington's acing this test. What about character backpacks? We've got them starting at $12.99. Burlington's done it again. How about sneakers for the kids? A-plus brands and right on trend starting at $11.99. Saving is now in session. Burlington, deals, brands, wow! Styles and selections vary by location.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
President has proposed, let me say it again. I had a little bit of stray walnut for my breakfast on my tongue there.
Stray walnut on my tongue is my favorite favorite Frank Sinatra song.
Trump has proposed to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook for cause. Cook was appointed by Biden, but has opposed the rate cuts that Trump has been demanding from the Fed. Bill Pulte is a top federal housing official, also a big, wealthy housing building guy, and now increasingly a Trump hatchet man, used apparently some access to files that the government has to dig into files to come up with a claim that Cook committed mortgage fraud several years ago before her Fed appointment by claiming 2 homes as her primary residence to get more favorable rates for the one that wasn't maybe her primary residence. Cook is one of several Trump opponents who are being targeted with the same charge, also Senator Adam Schiff and also New York Attorney General Letitia Adams. So, John, I think there are two, there's many different elements. One is the sort of attack on the independence of the Fed. The other is the use of quite pretextual, getting government records to kind of come up with something that you can tar an opponent with. So does this seem shocking, surprising, out of the norm?
Well, I mean, as we've struggled with over the years, it is out of the norm, and that should be stated, even though it's not extremely out of the norm for Donald Trump. So using information that you have access to build a case to eject a member of the Fed because you don't like Fed policy, that is out of the norm. It's not surprising for President Trump. I think it's also part of a secondary act, which is that we've seen consistently that when the president wants to delegitimize an institution, he claims that the people involved in the institution are corrupt. So, Brad Raffensperger, after the 2020 election, he said he was fraudulent. Therefore, you couldn't believe what he had to say. He said the people who ran USAID were lining their own pockets, so it must be gotten rid of. He said the same thing about Jack Smith. Jerome Powell, he claimed, was mismanaging the Fed's real estate. Barack Obama, most famously, when he launched himself, President Trump did, on his national ascent, claimed that Obama wasn't born in the country. So it's to suggest that the entire enterprise is rigged and not legitimate. Therefore, in a foot race over who gets to define what the economy is, and the Fed has a big voice in that, contrary to what the president is saying. If he delegitimizes the institution, then he gets to be the author of the narrative about what's happening in the economy. So I think there's two things. He'd like rates to be lower. He'd like to put his own people on the Fed. But I think more broadly, he's doing what he's been able to do successfully in his career, which is by delegitimize an individual that's a part of an institution, he waters down the overall power of the institution. So I think that's part of what's happening here, too.
Yeah, that is so well put. Of course, the person who's been convicted of giant gobs of mortgage fraud is Donald Trump. I also been thinking that I never knew the names of anybody on the Fed Board of Governors except for Jerome Powell until now. There's a way he's personalizing it that itself kind of brings it down to earth. And then, let's talk about using the federal government to investigate people like this. I was talking to a prosecutor yesterday who said, it's one thing if Bill Pulte, who is the housing authority official in the middle of all of this, if he's starting with mortgage fraud and there are a whole bunch of Republicans and Democrats who might be in some way having inconsistencies in their mortgage documents, and he's checking to see if there's any real harm here. But of course, the chances that is how it's happening, that it's starting with the conduct as opposed to the targets, seem infinitesimally small. And so instead, what we have is using the federal government to go after particular targets based on these documents. And, it is really easy to make the whole story about whether someone has either actually falsified a document or inadvertently made a mistake. We really have no idea what this evidence is. But suddenly, this is what Lisa Cook is about and stands for, even though she has an illustrious career behind her. I just find that very frustrating that the accusation itself takes on so much attention. And there's really nothing to be done about that. That when you're the president and you make these accusations, that is what happens. But it is this long pattern in which people get tarnished and smeared and sullied. And we spend a lot of time on the truth of the allegations as opposed to the vindictive, selective nature of the targeting.
Right. And we know that it's vindictive and selective, and we know that it is going after the president's enemies because we have just a perfect example in Texas where the leading Trumpist Senate Republican, the candidate for the Senate seat in Texas, Ken Paxton, the attorney general of that state, has been accused of exactly the same thing with 3 houses. And there has been no suggestion, no hint that Bill Pulte is going after him. It has clearly been targeted at particular people who all are presidential opponents.
And also, we know that mortgage fraud in this kind of situation is only prosecuted usually. First of all, it's rarely prosecuted, but usually it's only if a loan goes bad, right? The problem is you listed these residences, you got a break on your loan terms, and then you don't pay it back. And so there is actual harm. And that's when prosecutors try to show intent. Nothing like that is going on here as far as we know.
But I will say, just because these loans don't go bad doesn't mean it's not a problem and not a crime. People claiming a second home as a primary residence in order to get a sweetheart deal is seedy. I don't think most people should go to jail for that. It is seedy if that is in fact what these folks have done.
And also in order to claim a sweetheart deal involves intent, right? And that can be very hard to prove in cases like this. I mean, in the Letitia James case where we have a similar allegation, it seems like James filled out forms correctly in some instances and incorrectly elsewhere. And that suggests a mistake. Again, we don't know the facts, but I keep having to say that. And it sort of makes me mad that is where the attention is going.
And also the defense you just gave, David, which is is almost identical to the defense that the Trump organization used to try to explain why he was not liable for civil action, because he was basically like, nobody got hurt, even though, even if I did inflate the assets of my business, nobody got hurt. Right.
And of course, it drives out loans that could go to people who are not cheating, and B, it just subtly increases the amount of risk in the system, which is risky for everybody. And that's a problem when risk is increased for everybody. There are 2 points that I really want to get on. So I do want to get on the legality of this question of whether Cook can be fired for cause. But I actually want to throw back to your original point, John, of going after a person to delegitimize the institution and take control of the economy or have more ownership over it. And there has been this sense like, the market is going to come save the day. The market. seen a potential end to Fed independence. The market will ride up on a pony in armor and a sword, and will strike stock prices down and push interest rates up, yeah. and everything will come to the rescue because Trump will be so panicked at what's going on in the market. But the market, it turns out, has greeted all of this with a shrug, as it more or less greeted the deposing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics with a shrug. They don't seem to be the market at this moment does not seem to be too panicked about the idea that economic data is no longer quite as trustworthy as it was, or that the Fed is no longer quite as independent as it was. So why is there not more panic about this? And what does it signal that the investors and people with money are just like, we'll go along with it. We're stock market's at a record high. Why not?
I will stumble out a partial theory, which flirts with hot takeism. Well, first of all, the market has previously reacted to Trump's some of his tariff behavior, and it's caused him to pull in his horns in some cases. That's what leads to the accusation that he always caves on these tariffs, which is not a fair accusation. He does whipsaw exceedingly in the various things he does, but he hasn't caved in every instance. But in fact, he did respond to bond market pressure. And that was kind of one of those instances where, in this constant measurement of what portions of gravity really exist and what part did we believe in but turn out not to exist, the bond market did exist for a little while, but the market in this case has not. Why? I don't know, but one can remember that the Fed behavior that underlied the mortgage-backed security market that led to the Great Recession, that the market didn't pay attention to the underlying rot that led to the Great Recession. And so it's possible for the market, the market is not perfect. And so my guess is the market likes deregulation. People would like rates to be lower for, plants and equipment and all of that. So I guess the market is not always perfect.
I think it's about the short term versus the long term too, right? The sugar high, which maybe is just another way of saying what you were just saying, but it seems like we're having a lot of trouble pricing in medium to long term consequences, both economically and culturally and politically, everything. That there's this sense that as long as it's not immediately causing total cataclysm, we can't adequately absorb it. I don't really get it.
Right. You in sort of an expansionary lower interest rate environment. It's good. Like, people invest. People take more chances. People sell and buy houses more often. Longer term, of course, you've raised the risk of inflation. You have also, more importantly, this is where I get resentful, is you've raised the sense, you have increased by some amount the mistrust of America and the world, the sense that we are not to be trusted. And over the long term, that means there will be slightly less appetite for our debts, tiny bit less trust in the system, higher risk premiums for everything. And that's friction for all of us that is not born, as you say, Emily, tomorrow or in the next month. It's born over years and years to come when countries become unreliable.
I think you could also imagine it's a combination that's muddy. So, the Fed's decision-making is still a collective thing, and the viewpoints of those on the Fed, the president doesn't yet have a majority on the Fed. So there's that. There's the fact that there has to be a legal process that goes through for Koch to get bounced. And most people believe that the president doesn't have a case here, and Emily should weigh in on what it means to have cause or not have cause that would lead to whether the case is genuine or not. And I think those contributing factors, plus the fact that the president says a lot of stuff and has for a long time that he either never follows through on or that never happens, and that it's mostly just a nuisance effort, or the one I described earlier, that his real goal here is not necessarily to bounce Koch, although, hey, that'd be great if it happened, but the idea is to create uncertainty about the Fed so that he, as a political matter, can be the author of his definition of whatever's happening in the economy, not Jerome Powell's or the Fed's.
Emily, let's go to this legal question. So, unlike other officials and independent agencies that Trump has fired, Koch has been fired for cause. And with other people, when he was firing the heads of or commissioners he didn't like on different commissions, he just fired them and said, I'm in charge. I can do whatever I want. And the Supreme Court had more or less gave him approval. But with Koch, he declared there is a cause to fire her. does that make a difference? B, where do you think the legal case stands here?
Yeah, so you're right. The Supreme Court in May, in this case called Trump versus Wilcox, basically, without quite doing it, because this was an emergency provisional order, but they signaled they were ready to overturn this 90-year-old precedent that said the president cannot just willy-nilly fire the heads of independent agencies. And those cases, exactly as you said, Trump just said, my Article 2 powers as president give me the right to do this. The court put in this one sentence kind of aside in which it said, we think the Fed is different. It's quasi-private and differently structured than other independent agencies, and was kind of roundly criticized for being so thinly and poorly reasoned. So in dissent, Justice Kagan said, wait a second, that's not an accurate description of the Fed. And I'm kind of glad to hear that you think that the president doesn't have the power to fire the members of the Fed board. But like, what's really going on here? So Trump has sort of, I'd say, called the Supreme Court on its bluff. I mean, I read that majority opinion, that one sentence, to be the justices in their kind of decorous, respectful language saying to the president, please don't go here. We think the Fed is different. We haven't really told you why convincingly, but just please don't do this. And this is not a president who reads signals like that. And so he has charged right over this line that they kind of decorously tried to draw, and is saying that this is a different firing than the others because it's for cause. So now we're going to have a lot of discussion of what for cause means. And there are like different respected legal scholars arguing different things about this. If you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, in very different contexts from the Fed, there are Supreme Court opinions, at least one or two, that suggest that the president has enormous discretion to decide what cause means. And this is not something that the courts really get to muck about in and second guess him about. That seems like a big problem for this instance, because it suggests that Trump can say whatever he wants with whatever pretext, doesn't have to prove anything in court, and he just gets to say good riddance to Lisa Cook. I just cannot believe that is how it is supposed to work, because if you look at the history of the Fed, again, in the beginning of the 20th century, Congress talked a lot about this and why there was a whole movement that the president could just control the Federal Board of Reserve, and that it was a good idea to tie monetary policy more directly to Democratic representation by giving him that authority. And Congress rejected that argument explicitly. And so this for cause provision, in order for it to do what Congress intended, it's got to mean something more than I make a bunch of bare allegations and tell you to get lost. However, everything I just said is going to have to be litigated. Cook has made it clear she is suing. District courts, this will go up the chain, and it's going to come back to the Supreme Court. And that sets up a real test of the justices. Did they mean what they said in Wilcox? Are they going to explain it better this time and make it really stand up that the Fed has more independence from the president, and that is what Congress intended for the good of all of us and the economy? Or are they going to say, oh, you're right, now that you've decided this is for cause, it doesn't matter how bare your pretext is for this, we are going to go along with this because we believe in this strong executive power that you are exercising? That's the question.
Emily, isn't there sort of a way station point, which is that wasn't the actual ruling in Wilcox not exactly that they definitively lost their jobs, but that Trump was able to replace them while they could make their legal appeals. So they still are going to make their legal appeals. I imagine that there's a very convenient thing that the Supreme Court can do, which is very similar, which it can say, President Trump has claimed this for cause. He absolutely needs the authority to carry forth his economic policy with the correct people. So Ms. Cook, thank you for your service. You can continue this legal process, but you are no longer on the Fed, and you can sue and try to reverse this later. But it's so important for the president to be able to act and move forward that we are going to respect his claim of cause for now. And if it turns out that it was bogus, maybe we'll restore this many years later down the road. But for the moment, it is important just to give the president the freedom of action that the executive needs, because the executive is the embodiment of all of us and controls everything.
Yeah, I mean, that is totally possible, and it's in line with the way the court has been interpreting what's called irreparable harm. So the reason all of this is at least in theory, temporary and provisional, is that we're on the court's emergency docket. So these are cases that have not gone through the whole full process of lower courts and, lengthy consideration and briefing and argument. They're showing up quickly. And in that scenario, all courts are supposed to, this is like whether you're granting an emergency order, right? And you're supposed to talk about who is likely to succeed on the merits, which party, where irreparable harm would be caused, and then some vaguer thing about balancing the equities. And so you're right, David, in these previous cases we've seen this year, the court had said there is irreparable harm to the government.
To the president, right.
To the president, if someone continues to serve in office who might not actually get to stay there because maybe this firing was legitimate. And, the thing is, like, if they do that in this case, and then Trump nominate someone else to the Fed and the Senate confirms someone else to the Fed, then you're going to have first of all, de facto one that would unseat Koch, right? Or you have this weird scenario of two popes where there's a kind of vying and a false. Anyway, I don't exactly understand how that would play out, except that I do think it would put some pressure on the courts to get to a more final result relatively quickly. And also the thing about these emergency orders is that they're all about what the default is in the, 2 years it takes for full litigation to unfold, right? And so we've been living in a world in which when there's an executive order often, or sometimes a law that Congress has passed and people don't like it, so they find a sympathetic district court judge to block that law from going into effect. And both Republicans and Democrats have done this, right? Biden had lots of things that were blocked. And then it takes a while. There's a stately pace. And in the meantime, the status quo pre the order or the law is what rules, what reigns. I should find a better Democratic word, but is the law of the land. What we're having now are, this procession. We're now at, I think, 23 emergency orders from the Supreme Court that are very quickly changing the status quo because of late, the Supreme Court has been ruling almost entirely on Trump's side, which means these dramatic changes take place. And so if we see that in this case and the scenario you just outlined unfolds, the result will be that Koch is not on the Fed Board of Governors anymore, and Trump will have the votes to really change it.
I guarantee Koch will not be on the Fed Board of Governors in a month. I will make anyone a bet.
2 quick points about the Fed. If you want a quick and dirty way to think about the stakes here, even though, as we previously discussed, the market's not freaking out in this way, I mean, you can make a Fed-based argument for basically being too restrictive made the Great Depression worse, that Fed policy led to the massive inflation of the 1970s, and that, as I mentioned earlier, that it had a role in the 2007-2009 financial crisis by keeping rates too low, which led to the housing bubble. So the Fed's not perfect, obviously, even when it's independent. But the concern is that if you have particularly influenced by a president who believes in all kinds of things that are verifiably untrue, like the idea that foreign countries pay tariffs, if you hook that into the economy, you have real catastrophe coming. And the signs of concern are really interesting. Not only is inflation going up a little bit, by the way, inflation is always ticking up. Everybody's always talking about how it's ticking up. It drives me crazy. Anyway, there's an important inflation indicator that will appear on Friday, but also labor is really interesting. We saw the Bureau of Labor Statistic numbers show that jobs were down. The president then fired the head of BLS because he didn't like the numbers. But the consumer confidence report that came out this week showed, and I thought this was quite interesting, is you can fire the head of BLS, but regular people in the consumer confidence numbers for the 8th consecutive month, the perceptions of job availability fell, which basically is people are saying jobs are hard to get. So the 2 things the Fed cares about, inflation and jobs, the warning signs are blinking. And I mean, you can fire people and stuff, but the real economy is still out there working, and people are having a contrary experience to the one that the president is articulating. And that's what's a part of this Fed conversation.
This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Bombas. Summer's here and we're all chasing something, a break, a goal, a vibe. Do not let bad socks and blisters ruin it. I am a Bombas socks evangelist. I'm a Bombas socks enthusiast. Every day I'm in my Bombas socks now. They're so comfortable. They have this incredible quality of being both cool and breathable, but also holding tight, gripping in all the right ways. And it makes all the kind of exercise I do in Bombas a pure joy. And Bombas doesn't stop at socks. Check out the fresh white tees, waterproof slides for the beach, and buttery soft sweat-wicking underwear for head-to-toe comfort. Best of all, Bombas items don't just feel good, they do good, because one purchased equals one donated to someone who needs it. Head over to bombas.com/political and use code political for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/political. Code political at checkout. bombas.com/political and use code political. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Quince. Why spend a fortune on basics when you don't have to? Quince has high-quality fabrics, classic fits, and lightweight layers for warm weather, all at prices that make sense. If you're somebody like me who wants to look good, but doesn't necessarily love to do a ton of shopping and doesn't necessarily know what he wants when he goes shopping, Quince is ideal because Quince has amazing-looking staples, basics that look awesome and can be worn and put together in ways that make sense. I have this black short sleeve Quince shirt that I bought for the summer that honestly I would wear every single day. Right now, I am wearing a pair of Quince shorts that are so breathable and comfortable. And everything at Quince is like that. And the best part is that everything with Quince is half the cost of similar brands. So keep it classic and cool with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/gabfest for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/gabfest to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/gabfest. The Trump occupation of Washington, D.C., my hometown, continues. The president called for death penalty for murders here. They're also attempting to basically federalize all crime that's committed here in D.C. But it's already clear that the president is interested in taking his posse comitatus tour to other cities. He is gearing up to federalize the Illinois National Guard, potentially, over the wishes of the Illinois governor and the Chicago mayor, to send them into the streets of Chicago, also to send a huge contingent of ICE agents to Chicago. And he has announced that he wants to create a rapid reaction force in the National Guard to deploy for local law enforcement. He has also announced that he is going to do everything he can to force jurisdictions to require cash bail, to end their cashless bail policies. So there are a number of cities, Emily, we'll talk about this, and states, excuse me, that have this. So, John, how is Trump's intrusion to law enforcement and state level decisions about law enforcement going?
Well, I mean, depends who you ask, of course. Like, let's just throw some stuff out there on the table and you can figure it out. I mean, the mayor of Washington says it's helping with police, what he's done, although the mayor does not think having the National Guard there is a good idea. Governor Pritzker of Illinois does not like the idea of the National Guard coming to Chicago. The public sure doesn't like it. 38% support the use of the National Guard in a recent Reuters poll. And we should talk about why and whether and how that matters. So it's quite mixed. The CBS data team looked at the numbers in Washington during the period that federal agents and the National Guard have been deployed, and the numbers are down significantly. The numbers were already going down. And obviously, when you have a full, massive force on the streets in any town, the numbers are going to go down. But the question is, A, is that sustainable? To which the answer is no. And then B, are you really doing anything other than taking care of the situation in a short period of time, but doing nothing to address the underlying factors of crime, which we should talk about at greater length?
I mean, just in that vein, to give the Emily Bazelon response, which works really well in the short term. I think it's fine in the short term. And indeed, the numbers are down. They're spending a huge amount of money. The troops will leave at some point, and maybe crime will stay down, and that will be amazing. If crime completely stays down, it's like at a much lower level. Wouldn't that be great? But what will happen is no doubt the numbers will pop back up, and Trump will then say, oh, look, it was my work that kept it down. And now the city can't control it. It's a situation where Trump can get credit for whatever he wants, no matter what the outcome is.
And we have building a habit of federal troops. I mean, we're going to have Hegseth creating some Department of Defense roving force that, can enter American cities. I mean, this is going against our whole tradition of not having domestic troops deployed against Americans on domestic soil.
So why is the posse comitatus, why is it such a weak tea here, Emily?
Well, it has, yes, it's a law from the 19th century that is supposed to limit exactly what's happening here, but it has holes in it. Those holes are up to the president's discretion. We have a president who does not respect all the norms and traditions that prevented, restrained other presidents from going down this path. And the politics do not seem to be pushing back against Trump enough to stop him.
But can we just talk about so posse comitatus says you cannot use the army. It's a criminal law that says you can't use the army in civil law enforcement, domestic law enforcement. The exceptions, there are exceptions. So there's the idea that if you cannot enforce the law with the regular federal law with the regular forces available to you, you can use the army. Also, you can declare, the Insurrection Act allows you to declare there's an insurrection against the United States, which Trump has not yet done, but no doubt would under the
around the corner
circumstances. And Trump appears to be acting with total legal impunity. He doesn't appear to have any fear that this is going to be stopped by anybody.
I mean, there is a trial happening in Los Angeles right now that is challenging the way he used troops in California. There are some legal breaks that could come into play, but the truth is these laws have holes in them. And if he did invoke the Insurrection Act, he would have more legal authority than he has thus far given himself. So that remains in his back pocket. And this is a situation in which I would like to think that the courts can stand up and really protect these things from happening. But the way the statutes work, there is a lot of reliance on a good faith executive who is a steward of the country and cares about the national good. And it just is not the law as text that is written that is necessarily going to stop the person who controls the military, especially when he's also busy firing people in the military who don't agree with him.
I'm going to do it and you stop me has been a successful approach by the president. I mean, and the dividends of his work picking people for the Supreme Court have continued to pay off. So this seems completely in keeping with his successful strategies so far to expand power and also take advantage of that period between when he does the thing and then when the courts get through their necessarily deliberate process of doing the thing. Plus, by the way, in the interim, he, as a political matter, gets to sit in the center of the conversation and say, I'm taking care of this thing that is legitimately worrying to a lot of people. And I would add, I guess this is the time to make what I find interesting in the political is that this is not a popular thing that the president is doing. But what does popularity mean when, 419 of your House districts are basically locked up in partisanship? In other words, in a situation where the next election will be fought in a very few number of swing districts, the downside of doing wildly unpopular things changes from the perception would have had about doing unpopular things 10, 20, 30 years ago. And when you have a Congress that's never going to stop you and only going to find new ways to support what you're doing, the feedback mechanism that might keep a president from doing whatever they want, if the courts are either on his side or moving slowly, if Congress, which is controlled by his party, is going to do nothing, and if the political feedback mechanism is constricted by partisanship, then the way we evaluate the political downsides of some of these behavior has to change. I don't know exactly how. And we have seen also that, whatever he's doing with the National Guard, it is not the same as what he's been doing with ICE. And I think that's been a kind of definition of terms that's gotten lost. A lot of the coverage says that he's got a domestic police force and they're cracking down on crime. As I understand it so far, the National Guard is not arresting anybody. It's not a police force at the moment. This is distinct from what the guys in the ICE guys in the masks grabbing people in the middle of the street. That's different. But what you hear from DC officials, according to our Scott McFarlane, is actually they get to go do community policing while the Guard is taking care of, the mall and other stuff. And so there's actually a beneficial load sharing that's taking place. I don't know if that lasts. I don't know the depth of that. But this is not the same as, having guys in mass arresting people. We're not there yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, it just from my experiences in DC, that's exactly right. The National Guard do not appear to be anything. They don't appear to be menacing. The vehicles look crazy and the vehicles look daunting, but they themselves are just seem pleasant enough and are being perfectly pleasant to the citizenry too. So
let's not forget the thousands of new ICE agents who are being hired, right? Because ICE, which does seem menacing, is expanding. And then also the idea of this Defense Department Hegseth initiated force, which we don't know what it looks like yet.
Right. The Rapid Reaction Force.
I think we should have a conversation one day about the kind of people who will be drawn to ICE and the selection for the worst sorts of people that ICE is doing now. Because who wants to be an ICE agent now is a really interesting question. What's required to being an ICE agent? It does seem like you're going to be selecting for people who are bullies, who want some level of impunity, who like the idea of hiding behind a mask to do some act of physical assault or physical terror against others. And those are not people you really want in law enforcement, honestly.
But I think you could imagine also another cohort of people who think that, the people misbehaving in the masks are a few bad apples, and that generally the feeling that the country was being, that there were too many migrants coming into the country and it was unfair to those who'd waited in line, means that you're engaged in a noble pursuit of protecting America's sovereignty. I don't think it's necessarily the case that surely there will be people who see the opportunity to go beat others up on the street, but
yes, you're right. I guess maybe I should put it differently, which is that once you allow people to be in masks or you encourage them to be in masks, and you intrinsically change who they are and how they behave. When people are in masks, they just don't behave the way they might elsewhere. And so you've changed the culture of the place and you've changed the habits of the place, and people will act in ways that are
on the margins, not everyone.
But much more, because they have impunity and because the culture is now you have impunity. And once the culture of a place changes like that, then we've seen this. You saw this in American troops in Vietnam. Every moment in history when people have a sense that they are acting nobly and with impunity, they act with impunity.
And I'm sure Emily has seen that also in domestic U.S. police forces when there are special units formed that are sort of the
just out units. Yeah, it's bad. Bad stuff happens.
Before we leave this topic, can we actually talk about one thing which I find fascinating and somewhat heartening here in DC, which is jury nullification or grand jury nullification. So there have now been two very high-profile examples where people charged with federal crimes in DC, one person is a former paralegal Department of Justice who yelled at federal agents basically get out of the city and threw a sandwich at an agent. And then another case where someone was accused of assault while she was more or less protesting this federal takeover of the city. And they brought federal charges, grand jury, felony charges. And in both cases, the grand juries have declined to indict. And in one case, they impaneled 3 different grand juries to try to indict this woman. And 3 different grand juries refused to indict her. And as a citizen of Washington, I freaking love this. I don't, jury nullification in general is not like the best way for justice to be carried out. But the idea that citizens can use their discretion to act, it's not civic disobedience. It is civic responsibility to say when if the law is out of control, so we are not going to enable the law. We're not going to allow the worst predations of the law to be carried forth. I am kind of excited. Maybe this will be a wider spread thing that makes it hard for this sort of forbidding of protest and forbidding of dissent to be carried out.
This has happened in a few cases also in Los Angeles. I don't actually think it's nullification for this reason. That word we usually use when there's a lot of proof that someone's guilty, like found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt with a regular jury after a trial, and the jury says, too bad, we're not finding you guilty. A grand jury, the traditional thing people say about it is they'll indict a ham sandwich. And that's because it's a very low standard. This is about indictment, not conviction. It's probable cause. The prosecutors are usually the only people who put on any evidence. And they usually have enough evidence for probable cause, right? Especially if you're the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C. Presumably, you know how to do this. So I think what's happening here is that, first of all, the prosecutors have jacked up these charges to felony charges. And actually, the elements of the crime are just not there. And the grand jurors are saying, like, this is bullshit. Which is not the same as like, we see these facts, we think someone is guilty and we refuse to convict them anyway. I keep mentioning this. I was talking to another prosecutor yesterday who was saying the reason grand jurors usually indict is because prosecutors usually are putting up good cases. And if these are bad cases, then we would expect grand jurors to continue to refuse to indict. So it's possible that there is a kind of check in the system here that will operate the way you're encouraging, David. We'll have to see if it becomes widespread or not.
Can I just say that expression, a grand jury would indict a ham sandwich, is one of the great enduring expressions because, and it also just has this wonderful sense of the absurd in it. And I just, I love it. Can I just make one last point before the garage door closes here, which is that in a scenario that could probably never happen in real life, I wonder if the struggling Democratic Party ever had a person in it who might be a governor of a state who would say, Mr. President, let's work together on the crime issue, maybe even send in the National Guard so they can take care of these 10 things that the police do that really aren't about community policing and building stronger ties with the people who are affected by crime and whose communities have more crime than others. And then I'd also like the Department of Education to help us out with the following 6 things that keep the kids who end up turning to crime, that would keep them in the schools and on a pathway towards American opportunity and not in a life of crime. And while you're at it, would you help us work on community policing here and send us this help with mental health resources and de-escalation studies that have been done shown the following 3 federal things would help that would essentially change the conversation from a vision of crime that you can just smash with the cast iron lid, which takes care of the thing for the short term but doesn't take care of it for the long run, and changes the conversation from one where you actually get to the root causes. Who knows if any of this would work in my HBO miniseries, but it seems like it would be a healthier political market in which somebody would come forward and make that case using this opportunity to make the counter argument, which I kind of haven't seen.
What would that HBO series be called? The Governor.
It'd be called
The Experiment.
It'd be called, oh my God, nothing else is on TV. Why am I watching this?
I gotta say something about these cash bail policies before we close, which is just that states and cities that have ended cash bail did so for strong empirical reasons. Cash bail causes a lot of suffering for poor people who who are arrested for low-level offenses and end up basically spending a lot of time in jail before they've been convicted of anything in pretrial detention. And what we know about this is that it's really a mechanism for forcing people to plead guilty because they don't have enough money to get out and they're stuck. And it just is the system we use so that all of the cases will churn through without being put to trial, which is very labor intensive for prosecutors. We also know that sitting in jail for pretrial detention is something that tends to cause people to commit more crimes because for lots of reasons, jail is traumatizing. You know, you're around other people who are accused of committing crimes. You may lose your housing, your job, not to get to see your kids. It is bad. And so what we've seen in states and cities for the most part that have ended cash bail is that they use these other risk assessment tools to decide who has to sit in jail before trial. Doesn't mean everybody gets out. Judges look at whether you're a risk of flight, how much they think that you are a risk of committing other crimes. These laws almost never apply to felony situations. They're for misdemeanors. And it all seems to be working fine for the most part. The studies that people have done have shown that ending cash bail does not seem to cause a rise in crime. And so I mean, look, this is a policy, an order that I think the courts probably do have the power to block because it's such a wide-ranging effort for the federal government to control the behavior of states and cities. But there's also just like a deep policy problem here with ending these no cash bail laws.
This episode is brought to you by Built. If you're paying rent every month without earning anything in return, consider joining Built, the rewards program designed for renters who want to earn something for their largest monthly expense. By paying rent through Built, you earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But it doesn't stop there. Built is about making your entire neighborhood more rewarding. You can dine out at your favorite local restaurants and earn additional points, get VIP treatment at certain fitness studios, and enjoy exclusive experiences just for Built members every month. Built is turning a monthly expense into an opportunity to earn rewards and discover the best that your neighborhood has to offer. Your rent is finally working for you. Earn points on rent and around your neighborhood wherever you call home by going to joinbuilt.com/gabfest. That's joinbilt.com/gabfest. Make sure to use the unique URL joinbilt.com/gabfest. This episode of the Gabfest is sponsored by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. And with Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, and design who are ready to help you take your business to the next level. Companies at every stage turn to Upwork to get things done and find more flexibility in the way they staff key projects and initiatives. Upwork's global marketplace is filled with top talent in IT, web dev, AI, design, admin support, marketing, and more. Plus, posting a job on Upwork is easy. With no cost to join, you can register, browse freelancer profiles, get help drafting a job post, or even book a consultation. And from there, you can connect with freelancers and easily hire them. Upwork makes the entire process simpler and more affordable with industry low fees. So visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to post your job for free and connect with top talent ready to help your business grow. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you.
Shop Blinds.com Labor Day Mega Sale happening now. Save up to 50% site-wide plus a free measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
The Trump administration, led primarily by Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, is waging an all-out assault against renewable energy. They've declared a moratorium on new wind projects. They're now stopping projects that are already underway. What got my attention was this week they halted construction on a nearly finished $6.5 billion project off the coast of Rhode Island, Revolution Wind, that would provide enough electricity to power 350,000 homes. They also stopped a project in Idaho. They went after a New York project. They're about to revoke approval for a Maryland wind farm that has already gotten many approvals and was about to be constructed. You know, they're also just trying to undermine solar. They tried to get a top official at the International Energy Agency fired for saying that the Earth was at peak consumption of fossil fuels. Just saying that apparently was so traumatizing. It was so traumatizing for the poor Trump officials to hear that might be true, was that this person should lose their job. They stopped a power line, a loan for a power line that would carry renewable energy. This crusade, John, I find so weird and perverse. Like we've gone from a world where I think the kind of conservative position has been all an energy economy, all forms of energy, energy, to one where the only correct form of energy is one that is burning something and hurling pollutants into the atmosphere as it does so.
Well, there are two other things that make it weird. One is that it's that there is a huge hunger and need for energy as artificial intelligence continues to increase, and as the administration does everything it can to promote artificial intelligence as a U.S. domestic product, gobbling up all of that energy. So you would think that the number one competitive quality in the global competition with China needs a lot of energy. So let's find it any way we can. Secondly, the Chinese have decided this. The Chinese are using renewables to fund their AI, and so they're becoming experts in this. And so you would think even from a competitive standpoint, you would want to compete with the Chinese on that. And so it does seem, and then also, of course, the explanations have been muddled to say the least about why these permits that have already been granted are being canceled, or just what the reason is for this behavior. It is puzzling.
It's like there's this idea somehow like that renewable energy is woke energy. It's cuck energy. And they come up with these things, which is, oh, well, the renewables, the wind doesn't always blow, or the sun doesn't. Guess what, guys? Headline: the sun doesn't shine at night, so you can't get solar energy at night. But all forms of energy have problems. They all have externalities, or the problem with burning fossil fuels is it incredibly difficult to extract them, and it's incredibly ugly and damaging and damaging to health to burn them. And so that's a problem with fossil fuels. And also they come in a very limited supply. So the idea that these particular forms of energy are somehow inferior is so stupid. And as you say, John, it's also just, it takes us out of the most important technological progress of our time. Energy is the economy. Like, energy production is literally the most important function of a modern economy. The more energy you can produce, the more you can grow, the crops you can grow, the more people you can feed, the more people you can house, the more comfort you can provide, the more things you can make. That it is the alpha and omega of an economy, is the amount of energy production. And to willfully remove this new, increasingly cheap and infinitely renewable form of energy is so crazy, Emily Bazelon.
Yeah, I mean, especially when the tech companies are building these giant, very energy intensive data centers, and it is clear that there's pressure on the electricity grid and we need more electricity to take away one source does seem crazy. I wonder, though, if it's not that puzzling and there's just a swampy explanation for this, which is that there are, lots of lobbyists for the, carbon fuel producing companies that are behind this in some way. And that, once we understand the kind of power, like political power that's operating in this sphere, it's not going to look like a big mystery as to why the Trump administration is doing this.
Picking up on that point, the governor of your state, Connecticut, Democrat Ned Lamont, said, I think there's a deal to be had, and I've got to see what the ask is. I have no idea what the ask is. He's talking here about making sure to protect the Revolution Wind project. And he has, probably wisely for a governor in this reality, accepted the idea that this is not about the stated reasons the project was killed, but that there's like some way in which this is an act of leverage from the administration or from the president. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, undid whatever a wind project in New York was going to get squashed, and the governor did something to get it unsquashed, which basically recognized this transactional relationship between the administration and individual states. So this is another instance in which anything attached to federal decision making is an opportunity for leverage to get something out of individual states, and connecting that with the 10% share that the government now owns in Intel and the share it owns in NVIDIA. I think the people who are concerned about those shares are concerned because they see leverage being used in other instances, and say, what happens when the president decides to use the public share of those companies to get the companies to do what he wants, as he's done with lots of other companies to get them to do what they want. It puts the free market basically with a president at its center in some instances. And that's not something that people have consistently thought is terribly healthy for prosperity.
Well, it's personalized, right? It's selective. It's not about okay, let's think about a systemic policy solution here and how to treat entities alike. It's about, we're just going to scoop up this part of Intel because we can and treat it differently than everyone else.
It's a great point. There's not a government. There's not, the debate is not whether the market forces lead to a better outcome, but whether there is a fixed worldview. Is there a fixed worldview? No, really. Actually, these decisions are made to create a condition for people coming to the administration with their hat in hand, and so there's no consistent set of rules operating here.
Right. You can make an argument for the government taking an equity stake in various, right? The auto bailout. This, you can have moments where you could do that in a policy fair, even-handed way, but that's not what this is. This is personalized one by one, you, not you, which is that is corruption.
It's corruption, and it makes it awful hard for everybody else to know what they're how to go forward.
Yeah, no even playing field.
Right. It's also that when you talk about a lot of the things that are big in the economy that require big investment, it is really hard when you're unsure what the landscape is to make a large investment, to invest in something. I mean, this is what's crazy about this Revolution Wind project in Rhode Island. They've already dropped, $4 or $5 billion into construction of this thing. And if you think like, oh my God, I am going to reach a point where I've invested 80% of my capital and they are going to arbitrarily yank permissions, you're just not going to do that in the future. And so that level of arbitrariness is really problematic. I just want to go back to, Emily, your point that it's the swampy explanation, which undoubtedly there's a lot of truth to that. Undoubtedly. It's just so disappointing to me to see here's an administration that has said, oh, we're here to rebuild manufacturing, to bring manufacturing jobs back. Big energy projects are manufacturing at the highest level. That's what big energy, when you build wind farms, when you build solar, that's manufacturing. That is that, and there's jobs and jobs and jobs for people to do that. And to kind of instead say, well, let's keep some old coal plants alive instead of doing this is so.
In fact, order them to stay alive when their owners are saying they've aged out. Yeah. Also, Doug Burgum knows better because North Dakota has like a third of their energy supply comes from wind. Do you guys wonder if Trump hadn't gotten pissed off about what wind turbines look like from the view of his golf course in New Jersey and Scotland if we just wouldn't be here?
Oh, definitely wouldn't be. Definitely. Yeah. No, it's like almost everybody who ends up objecting to wind objects because they see some wind farms elsewhere. And I will say, like, this is not true of offshore wind farms, but wind turbines that are near you on the ground are annoying. They make a lot of noise. That's why you have to site them in places that are pretty far away. They do make a lot of noise. You don't want to be near them, but that's putting them out at sea is like perfect. Do it.
Or in the middle of nowhere, we have a lot of empty space in the United States of America.
Final point on this, Emily, because I know that this is a subject close to your family's heart, at least. One of the things that I think has been so effective about what Doug Burgum has been doing is that they're invoking environmental laws that had been used for other purposes for the alternate purpose. They're saying, oh, these ocean turbines are going to hurt whales. And so we need to really investigate them hurting whales.
But then they're firing the government scientists whose research shows that is not in fact true and that we've figured out how to build the wind turbines without hurting the whales. It is true that environmental laws generally can be a double-edged sword.
Let us go to cocktail chatter. When you have a double-edged sword and you're playing a game with your double-edged sword, which would be fun.
Well, no, it wouldn't.
It might be like a little bit. Do you think there was a Russian roulette version that people used to play with swords? Which is, they would, is this the edge? Does this have an edge? We'll find out. John Dickerson, what is your cocktail chatter that you will be chattering about to Mrs. D?
I was charmed by the history of Over the Rainbow, which I ended up doing an essay about. So my apologies if this is double dipping. But so the reason I was thinking about Over the Rainbow is because the Library of Congress released an excerpt from Yip Harburg, the lyricist's rough draft of it. And it shows it in mid-completion, which I love always because it reminds us that, creating things is hard and uncertain and stops and starts and all of that. And so, but what I had not realized
that originally like Under the Rainbow.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I hate those rainbows was a very weird way to start, but he eventually got there.
That ugly rainbow outside my window.
Did he hear Judy Garland singing in his head?
Well, you're going to actually, and was it written for Wizard of Oz also?
Well, a couple of things. Yes, written for Wizard of Oz. And the hearing part is interesting. Composer Harold Arlen was driving with his wife and told her to pull over the car, and he stopped the car, and he carried sheet music with him all the time. And he scratched down the tune because it had just struck him while they were driving to Grauman's Chinese Theater. And so it was created for the movie, and they almost took it out because one of the suits involved with producing the movie thought it was too slow, and it kind of got in the way of the action. And then in 2001, the National Endowment of the Arts and the Recording Industry Association of America said the song was the greatest song of the previous century. So whether you believe that or not, it had an impact. And it had this additional impact not only in the film, so the suits were wrong about that, but then also it became a kind of anthem in World War II, and then later had another life as a anthem for certain portions of the LGBTQ community. So it has had all of these lives. So what I liked was the half-written portion that we saw, the fact that it lived despite the efforts to kill it. But then the final line, "Why, oh, why can't I?" was actually written by Ira Gershwin, who Harburger and Arlen called in because they were like, how do I finish this? And and so Gershwin suggested that line, and somebody asked him later, well, where'd you come up with that? What was the inspiration? And he said, well, it was getting to be a long evening. So, which I also like for the kind of totally serendipitous nature of creativity, is we just had to go home, and that was what I came up with. Anyway, it was a lovely bit of little anecdotes packed into that song, and a reminder of the artistic journey. Also, by the way, I just as a recommendation, I'm reading Niall Williams's "This Is Happiness," which is
I read that.
Yeah, it's just a lovely little morning in the Irish countryside. It's a lovely way to start your day.
La Baz.
I'm tired of my own depressing chatters, so I think I figured out a way to talk about something that's alarming me, but also give it a more positive part to it. So Texas is considering a law right now that would basically make it possible to sue anyone who helps anybody get abortion pills in Texas. It's very broad. It's like the law in Texas that preceded Dobbs that basically managed to just tie everybody, all abortion providers in Texas, in knots. This is an effort to just use personal lawsuits to stop people from helping other people and their pregnancies in Texas. So that is one to watch. And Jessica Valenti in her Substack has been covering this really well.
Wait, that was your cheerful one?
No, let me continue. On a more here, I'm pairing it with something that is positive.
The cocktail chatters are not. Here's a fundamental question about the cocktail chatters. Are the cocktail chatters supposed to be things that you enjoy with a cocktail, or are they supposed to drive you to the cocktail cart?
That is a great question. I think lately I am in the latter category. I am embarrassed to say, and maybe no one will stand next to me at any cocktail parties this weekend. On a more positive note, the NPR series Embedded did an excellent podcast in the last month or so called The Network about women's efforts to tell each other about the abortion pill all over the world, starting in Brazil in the 1980s, these networks of women who accompany other women, especially in Argentina and Mexico. It's a really good look into this history, which I've also been really interested in for the book that I'm working on. So I recommend it. Embedded, The Network. It's a 3-part series. How's that?
Great. My chatter is I'm the last person apparently to come to University Challenge. My daughter is a watcher of University Challenge. Do you guys know what University Challenge is?
Nope.
It is.
Nope. You're not the last.
Not the last.
It's a British TV show that's been running for basically uninterrupted for 60 years, which is a quiz show for university students pitched at a level that is just so high you cannot believe it. You cannot believe how hard the questions are. And the students are all these, British PhD students and they have a team. So usually there's a scientist and a humanities person and then somebody from the medical field. And I have a few sample questions here. So in material science, the ratio of contractile to tensile strains is named after which French scientist born in 1781? You don't know? You guys don't know that?
This is just designed to make us all feel dumb.
Described as the little town keeping the lights on in France, Arlit in Niger was until 2021 the site of one of the world's largest mines of which toxic metal? I mean, it's just like, what bird does the British Trust for Ornithology describe as by far the biggest passerine with a similar wingspan to a buzzard?
Does anyone know the answers to these things?
Crazy thing is some people do. And then, so they'll ask the one question, then they'll sort of do an opening question, a starter question, then there'll be 3 questions on the category. And so they'll ask the starter question, then they'll say, and the category is the Icelandic cinematographer I'm more Iverson. And you're like, what?
Wow.
What are you talking about? Anyway, it's extremely appealing.
Well, you're a bird person. Is the passerine, is it a crow or a raven or something?
I don't know. Good question. I'm not sure.
Good. Why don't we stump David right away? I feel like that's a good idea.
The quiz culture in the UK, in Ireland, is really robust. We were way out in the countryside of Ireland, and we were going to go to this pub that's nearby, and for quiz night, and trundle in there as the Yanks and have a little light, enjoyment. They were like, well, it starts at 8, you have to come at 7:30 and it ends at 11. You really have to lock in. So we decided that we would fail at everything. And so we didn't go.
I wish it definitely is the kind of thing I would have done had I been a British university student. Were you on the It's Academic? There's no way you were on the It's Academic team at Sidwell.
I wasn't, but I think Scott McFarlane was on It's Academic, my CBS colleague. And there's somebody else who had a famous turn on It's Academic. No, I was a disaster.
David Plotz.
Were you?
All right, guys, you've devolved into high school talk.
So just for the listeners, It's Academic was a local TV program that school teams from schools would compete in something close to what David has described, which, by the way, I must say is the most passive-aggressive, backwards way to boast about the fact you were on It's Academic, to design that entire chatter
just so I could
around just elevating that.
I'm not sure boasting is the right word about something I did 39 years ago.
Oh, no, you guys were heroes.
I think It's Academic might still be on. Anyway, listeners, please have something that isn't quite so embarrassing. Is your listener chatter? Please email them to us at gabfest@slate.com. Our listener chatter this week comes from Brad Hunt in Temecula, California.
Hey, Gabfest. This is Brad Hunt from Temecula, California. My chatter is about the website livingnewdeal.org, specifically the interactive map of over 19,000 bridges, libraries, murals, tunnels, aqueducts, city halls, state parks, monuments, and many other New Deal funded public works projects in virtually every community, city, county, and state, including a few states that weren't even states yet. It's a website I've known about for a while, but it kept returning to my mind recently amidst the chainsawing of public services, foreign aid, and the federal workforce. When I look at this dot-pocked map of New Deal projects, a great many of which still exist and have continually enriched their communities for the better part of a century, it's hard not to wonder what our current era will be remembered for when future generations chronicle the permanent marks we're making on the communal landscape.
That is it for our episode this week, but we also have a bonus episode in your feed. We're going to talk about the bizarre Eric Adams journalism bribery scandal. That is just for Slate Plus members, however, who also get special discounts to live shows, and they never hit the paywall on the Slate site, and much more. So if you are a member, thank you. If you're not a member, subscribe. Just go ahead and subscribe. Come on. Stop freeloading. Go to Slate.
What?
Go to Slate Plus directly.
Our punchy stage
from the Political Gabfest show page on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or go to slate.com/Gabfest Plus and tell them Emily sent you to get access wherever you listen. That is all for our show today. The Gabfest is produced by Kevin Bendis today, our researcher, Emily Ditto, our theme music, They Might Be Giants. Senior Director for Podcast Operations, Ben Richmond. For Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson, I'm David Plotz. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.